Your tomato plant isn't going to save you. I know that sounds harsh, but when things get rough, those pretty heirloom tomatoes you're babying all summer, they're luxury items. What you actually need are crops that store through winter, take serious calories, and won't die if you look at them wrong. So let's talk about the 18 plants that could actually keep you alive when grocery stores aren't an option. And fair warning, some of these are going to surprise you. Before we dive into the list, let's establish what we're actually talking about here. Survival crops aren't about variety or Instagram-worthy harvests. They're about three things: calories, storage, and reliability. You need plants that produce a lot of food per square foot, that don't require perfect conditions, and that you can store for months without refrigeration. Basically the opposite of what most backyard gardeners are growing. Let's start with the obvious one: potatoes. But most people don't understand why. One potato plant can produce 10 pounds of potatoes in about 100 days. Those potatoes will store in a cool, dark place for 6 months, sometimes longer. And here's the kicker: potatoes are calorie-dense. A pound of potatoes has about 350 calories. Compare that to a pound of lettuce at 70 calories. It's not even close. But here's what nobody tells you about growing potatoes. You can't just throw them in the ground and walk away. Well, you can, but you won't get much. Potatoes need hilling. That means as they grow, you keep piling dirt up around the stems. This forces the plant to produce more tubers. More tubers means more food. You should be hilling your potatoes at least twice during the growing season. Maybe 3 times, if you're serious about maximum production. The other thing about potatoes is variety matters. Some varieties are for eating right away. Others are storage varieties bred specifically to last through winter. Yukon Gold tastes great, but they don't store well. Kennebec or Katahdin, those are storage potatoes. They might not win any flavor awards, but they'll still be edible in March. That's what matters when you're trying to survive. Sweet potatoes. Now before you skip this one thinking they're the same as regular potatoes, hold on. Sweet potatoes are actually easier to grow in many climates, and they store even better. A sweet potato in proper conditions can last a year. A year. Regular potatoes wish they could do that. Sweet potatoes like heat. If you're in a warm climate, they're a no-brainer. One plant can produce 5 pounds or more. They're also more nutritious than regular potatoes. More fiber, more nutrients overall. The downside is they take longer to mature, usually 100 to 120 days, and they need a longer harvest window in fall. But if you can grow them, you absolutely should. You can eat sweet potato leaves. The young leaves and shoots are edible, taste kind of like spinach, and they keep producing all season while the tubers are developing underground. So you're getting 2 crops from one plant. That's efficiency. Now let's talk about dried beans. If potatoes are your carbohydrate source, beans are your protein. Dried beans store forever, basically. Stored properly in airtight containers, beans can last 30 years. I'm not exaggerating. Growing dried beans is different from growing green beans. You're not picking them young and tender. You're letting the pods mature completely on the plant until they're dry and brown. Then you harvest the whole plant, shell out the beans, and store them. The process takes longer than growing snap beans, usually 80 to 100 days minimum. But the payoff is enormous. One bean plant doesn't produce a lot, maybe a few ounces of dried beans. But beans are compact. You can grow a lot of plants in a small space. A 10 by 10 foot plot of bush beans could produce 15 to 20 pounds of dried beans. That's a huge amount of protein. And unlike meat, beans don't need refrigeration. The best varieties for survival growing are your basic soup beans. Pinto beans, black beans, navy beans, kidney beans. These are proven storage varieties that have fed people for generations. Don't get fancy with exotic varieties until you've mastered these basics. Moving on to winter squash. This category includes pumpkins, butternut squash, acorn squash, and a bunch of other hard-skinned varieties. Winter squash is survival gold because it stores for months and produces huge amounts of food. One butternut squash plant can produce 15 to 20 pounds of squash. That's a lot of food from one plant. The trick with winter squash is curing them properly after harvest. You can't just pick them and throw them in storage. They need to cure for a couple weeks in a warm, dry place to harden the skin. A properly cured butternut squash will store for 3 to 6 months. Some varieties last even longer. There are stories of people eating squash a year after harvest. Growing winter squash takes space. These plants sprawl. They're vines that will take over your garden if you let them. But you can grow them vertically on trellises if you don't have a lot of room. Just make sure the trellis is strong, because a fully grown squash weighs several pounds and you'll have multiple fruits per plant. Here's something interesting about winter squash. Roasted squash seeds are a legitimate food source, so you're getting the flesh of the squash plus the seeds, 2 foods from one harvest. Plus you can save some seeds for next year's planting. That's self-sufficiency.
Now let's talk about a climate.
Turnips. I know, turnips aren't sexy. Nobody's excited about turnips. But turnips are ridiculously easy to grow. They mature fast, and both the root and the greens are edible. A turnip plant is 2 vegetables in one. Turnips can be ready to harvest in 40 to 60 days. That's fast. You can get multiple crops in one season if you plant it right. Plant them in spring for an early summer harvest. Then plant again in late summer for a fall harvest. In mild climates, you can even overwinter them in the ground. The roots store well in a root cellar or even just in a bucket of damp sand in your basement. The greens can be eaten fresh like spinach or cooked like collards. They're nutritious and productive. 1 packet of turnip seeds costs $2 and will feed you for months if you grow them right. Cabbage is another underrated survival crop. A mature cabbage can weigh 10 pounds or more. That's a lot of food from one plant. Cabbage stores incredibly well. In a root cellar, or even just in your refrigerator, a head of cabbage can last 3 to 4 months. Some varieties last even longer. Growing cabbage requires patience. Most varieties need 80 to 100 days to mature. They also need consistent water, and they're prone to pests. Cabbage worms will destroy your crop if you don't manage them. But if you can keep the pests under control, cabbage produces an enormous amount of food per plant. You can also make sauerkraut from cabbage, which is fermented cabbage. Properly fermented sauerkraut lasts for months, sometimes a year or more. It's also really nutritious. Fermentation creates probiotics and increases the bioavailability of nutrients. So you're preserving food and making it more nutritious at the same time. Carrots might seem like an odd choice for survival crops. But hear me out. Carrots are incredibly productive in small spaces. You can grow a lot of carrots in a square foot. They store well in the ground in mild climates. Just leave them there and harvest as needed. In cold climates, you can store them in sand in a root cellar. The trick with carrots is soil. They need loose, deep soil or they grow all twisted and weird. If your soil is heavy clay, you need to amend it or grow shorter varieties. But once you've got the soil right, carrots are pretty low maintenance. They don't need much fertilizer. They're not particularly prone to disease. They just grow. 1 pound of carrots has about 180 calories. Not as much as potatoes, but still decent. And carrots are packed with vitamin A and other nutrients. In a survival situation, getting enough vitamins is just as important as getting enough calories. Onions are non-negotiable for survival growing. Onions store for months if cured properly. Some varieties last for a year. A properly grown and cured onion is basically a shelf-stable food that requires no special equipment to store. Just keep them in a cool, dry, dark place. Most people grow onions from sets, which are small bulbs. You plant them in early spring and harvest in late summer when the tops fall over. Then you cure them for a couple weeks before storage. It's a long process, but it's not complicated. Onions add flavor to everything. In a survival situation where you're eating a lot of the same foods over and over, onions make meals more palatable. That might not sound important, but psychologically, being able to make food taste better is huge for morale. Garlic is similar to onions, but even more valuable. It's highly nutritious, it has medicinal properties, and it's expensive to buy. Growing your own garlic makes financial sense even in good times. In difficult times, it's essential. You plant garlic in fall and harvest in early to mid-summer. It's in the ground for 8 to 9 months, which seems like a long time, but it's basically no maintenance. You plant it, mulch it, and forget about it until harvest. Garlic doesn't need much attention once it's established. 1 bulb of garlic planted will produce a whole new bulb with 6 to 10 cloves. So you can replant some of your harvest and buy garlic for planting once and then never again. That's the kind of self-sufficiency we're talking about. Kale is the only leafy green that made this list. And it's here for a reason. Kale is incredibly cold-hardy. It survives frost. In many climates, you can grow kale through winter and harvest it fresh all season. Fresh vegetables in January from your garden is a game changer. Kale is also ridiculously productive. One plant keeps producing for months. If you harvest leaves instead of pulling the whole plant, you can get pounds and pounds of greens from a single plant. And kale is nutritious. It's packed with vitamins, minerals, and it's one of the healthiest things you can eat. The downside of kale is it doesn't store well. You can't dry it and save it for later like you can with beans. But the ability to harvest fresh greens in winter makes up for that. Fresh food in winter is huge for health and morale. Beets are another dual-purpose crop. You eat the root and the greens. Beets are more nutritious than people realize. The roots have sugar, which means calories, plus vitamins and minerals. The greens are nutritious like chard or spinach. Beets grow relatively fast, usually 50 to 70 days, sometimes for months. And they're tolerant of various soil conditions. They're not as picky as some crops. You can grow beets in marginal soil and still get a decent harvest. You can also pickle beets for long-term storage. Pickled beets last for a year or more in sealed jars. Pickling is an old preservation method that works without refrigeration. Learning to pickle vegetables is a valuable skill in a survival situation. Corn might surprise you on this list, because modern corn is seen as not very nutritious. But we're not talking about sweet corn. We're talking about field corn, or dent corn. This is the corn that gets dried and ground into cornmeal. Cornmeal is a calorie-dense staple food that stores well. Growing corn takes space. Corn needs to be planted in blocks for proper pollination, not in single rows. Each plant produces 1 or 2 ears. You need a lot of plants to get a meaningful harvest. But if you have the space, corn is worth growing. Dried corn kernels can be ground into cornmeal for cornbread, polenta, or grits. Cornmeal stores for months, even longer if kept cool and dry. It's not the most exciting food, but it's reliable calories that will keep you alive. Peas are another protein source that stores well as dried peas. Growing dried peas is similar to growing dried beans. You let the pods mature completely on the plant until they're dry. Then you harvest and shell them. Split peas for soup come from this process. Peas are great because they grow in cool weather. You can plant them in early spring before your other crops go in. You can also plant them in late summer for a fall harvest. They're filling a garden space that would otherwise be empty. Dried peas store well and they cook relatively quickly compared to beans. A pot of split pea soup is nutritious, filling, and you can make it with vegetables from your garden. Peas, carrots, onions, potatoes. That's a complete meal from your survival garden. Radishes are the fastest crop on this list. That's less than a month from seed to food. In a situation where you need food fast, radishes are your answer. Now, radishes aren't particularly calorie-dense. They're mostly water. But they're food, they grow fast, and they can fill the gap while you're waiting for your slower crops to mature. Plus, the greens are edible. Young radish greens in a salad are actually really good. Winter radishes like daikon are different from spring radishes. They store better, and they take longer to mature. They store in a root cellar for months. In Asian cultures, preserved radishes are a staple food. There's a reason for that. Rutabagas are like turnips but bigger and they store even better. A rutabaga can weigh 3 or 4 pounds. They're cold-hardy. They grow well in poor soil. And they last for months in storage. Rutabagas are an old-school survival crop that modern gardeners have mostly forgotten about. The taste of rutabagas is controversial. Some people love them. Some people think they taste like dirt. But taste isn't the priority in a survival situation. Calories are the priority. Rutabagas deliver calories reliably in conditions where other crops might fail. Jerusalem artichokes, also called sunchokes, are probably the most unusual crop on this list. They're not artichokes. They're not from Jerusalem. They're a type of sunflower with edible tubers. And they're incredibly productive and nearly impossible to kill. One Jerusalem artichoke plant can produce 5 to 10 pounds of tubers. They spread aggressively. Plant them once, and you'll have them forever. Whether you want them or not, they're so productive and low maintenance that they're almost a weed. But they're an edible weed that can keep you alive. The tubers can be eaten raw, cooked, or stored. They don't store as long as potatoes, but they'll last a few months in the right conditions. The taste is slightly nutty and sweet. They're higher in protein than potatoes, and they're good for you. The last crop on our list is leeks. Leeks are in the onion family, but they're cold hardier than onions. In many climates, leeks can overwinter in the ground. They grow through fall and winter, and you harvest them in early spring when nothing else is available. A mature leek is all edible from the white part up through the green leaves. One leek can weigh a pound or more. They're flavorful, nutritious, and they fill the hunger gap in late winter and early spring when stored crops are running low and new crops haven't started producing yet. Growing these 18 crops doesn't mean you give up your favorite vegetables. It means you're being strategic. You're growing a foundation of survival crops that will keep you alive, and then you can add whatever else you want on top of that. The key is diversification. Don't put all your effort into potatoes, and then have a late blight wipe out your entire crop. Grow multiple types of crops, so if one fails, you've got backups. That's the whole point of this list. These crops, grown together, form a complete survival garden. Storage is just as important as growing. You can grow 1,000 pounds of potatoes, but if you can't store them properly, they'll rot before you can eat them. Learn about root cellaring. Learn about fermentation. Learn about drying and preserving. Growing food is only half the battle. Start small if you're new to this. Don't try to grow all 18 crops in your first year. Pick 5 or 6 and learn to grow those really well. Then expand. Sajal! You'll make mistakes. Seeds won't germinate. Plants will die. Pests will destroy things. That's normal. You learn by doing. The best time to learn survival gardening is before you actually need it. If you wait until things are difficult to start learning, you've waited too long. A garden takes months to produce food. You can't plant seeds in April and expect to be eating in May. Well, you can with radishes, but that's about it. These 18 crops have fed humans through wars, famines, economic collapses, and personal hardships for hundreds of years. They work because they're reliable, productive, and they don't require perfect conditions or expensive inputs. They're the foundation of food security. So start planning your survival garden now. Figure out which of these crops work in your climate. Buy seeds, prepare your soil, and start growing. And they always do eventually. You'll be really glad you did. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, subscribe for more practical gardening content. There's a lot more to cover.